Hey guys, it's Stephanie Parker, and today on the Sleeping Baby vlog, we're going to be discussing how to teach your baby to self-soothe to sleep. How in the world can they learn how to fall asleep on their own? It's a big question that a lot of you guys have, and that's what I'm going to address. And then I have a question for you guys, so stay tuned at the end because I need your help on something. But first of all, the Zipadee-Zip definitely goes a long way when it comes to learning how to self-soothe and teaching your child how to self-soothe. So if you don't have one, make sure to get one because it provides your little one with that cozy enclosed environment where when they startle or wake prematurely, it helps them fall back asleep. And often babies just need the Zipadee-Zip and nothing else to teach them how to self-soothe. But every baby is different, and some babies have sleep issues or things that they need to overcome that have nothing to do with what a baby is sleeping in. And so that's why I say it's very important to teach your child to learn how to self-soothe. And it's a skill that is taught by you. And I'm going to share a little bit about how I taught both my children, Charlotte and Maverick, how to self-soothe to sleep. And it's probably a way more important skill than a lot of skills that you teach your little ones, like learning how to eat with a spoon, or you're learning how to use a straw, or even potty training, because it creates very healthy sleep habits that directly impact their developmental growth, their mental growth. And so that's why I say it's very important. And studies have shown that as a baby that is able to self-soothe has a drastic impact on how long they sleep and how consistent their sleep is. And so that's why I say it's very important to do this. And like I said, it is a skill, and it's going to need a little bit of your help to make that happen. And so how in the world do you do this, right? Well, first of all, I would definitely say for everyone, try and get your little one on a schedule of some kind. An eat, a play, and sleep schedule, nap time schedule, nighttime schedule, something that they can expect or learn to rely on, because a baby does not know how to tell time. And so they only go off their metabolism. And if their metabolism says it's time to eat, well, then it's time to eat. And if it tells them that it's time to sleep, well, darn, it's time to sleep. And so if you can help create that schedule that's consistent and a good routine, and it can be flexible, things happen, but just give them a general idea of when things are supposed to happen during the day, it'll work volumes in your life because a baby can learn to expect those things as opposed to be surprised when you're saying, oh, it's time to sleep, but I'm not ready for sleep yet. And so try and get them on a schedule. The other thing that you want to try and do is try to wean them off of things that they have grown accustomed to needing in order to fall asleep. For example, nursing a baby to sleep, although it's much easier and wonderful when you do that. I nursed both my kids for a year. And the problem with nursing a baby to sleep is, or even rocking a baby to sleep, is they come to expect that. So when they wake prematurely, they all of a sudden need you to be able to fall back asleep. And that does two things. It's tough on you when you're exhausted and you need some sleep. And it's actually really tough on a child, because what happens is you've completely interrupted their sleep cycle to where they're not having that good, deep, and consistent sleep that they really need to be able to grow and develop. And so teaching a child to self-soothe just really works wonders in various areas of a child's life. So how in the world do you get rid of those things? How do you work through some of that weaning process of some of those associations that your child may need and you're giving to them, which I totally understand. Sometimes you're so exhausted, you're like, just take this bottle, or, or have a feeding so that I can go back to bed. I get it. Been there. And I'm just going to precursor all this by saying, I'm a mom too, and I don't have all the answers. I'm just telling you what worked for me and what worked for a lot of the hundreds of customers that have contacted us about these sort of questions. And so, take it for a grain of salt, but this is just my experience and just what I've learned through a lot of trial and error. But again, you got to find what works for you. So anyway, and how do you wean your child off of that? The best way to do it is make sure that they're just drowsy but still awake when you put them down for bed or for a nap time. And you're like, there's no way my child is going to sleep, but you've got to start somewhere. And so if you can start by just getting them close to falling asleep, but not 100% asleep, and then laying them down in their crib to where they're just about there. Not overtired, but just about ready to fall asleep. That will get you off on the right foot. And I'm going to tell you my experience with what happened with my little girl when I did this. So I tried the Ferber method on my daughter, and that involves a little bit more crying than some of the more gentle sleep coaching, which I did the gentle sleep coaching on my son. So I'll tell you experiences about that as well. But for my daughter, as soon as I would lay her down half awake or half asleep or whatever, she would just start, like for a couple minutes, maybe she'd sit there and just kind of look around in her crib, but then she'd start crying. And she was a crier. And I just want to assure you, those of you who have little ones that tend to bust out in tears when you lay them down without putting them down totally asleep, that it's okay. The American Pediatrics Association actually says that it's okay if a little one cries for a little bit. Now, within reason, right? But children actually can exert energy that they are not able to otherwise by crying. Because they can't get around and run around the block and get some exercise that way, right? They have to be able to exert that energy somehow. And sometimes for a baby, that is the only way they can exert that energy enough to where they're comfortable to fall asleep. And so I would put her in there and she'd look around and eventually start crying. And I'd look at my clock and I'd go 10 minutes. And then if she still hadn't fallen asleep, I'd go back in there and I'd try and soothe her while she was laying in the crib. The key is to try and teach them how to soothe without having to pick them up. And so if you can find a way to soothe them without picking them up, and this is going to take some trial and error. My daughter, I would rub her on her belly and make the shh sound really loudly. And when I say loudly, I mean loudly, because the sound actually mimics the sound a baby heard when they were in the womb, and it's very soothing for them. And so I found that rubbing her belly and shushing loudly allowed her to not cry anymore and soothe a little bit so that I could calm her down. And I would do that for a while. I'd do it for a while, and then I'd slowly walk out shushing, tiptoe out. And then I'd wait, like at the door, like I was holding my breath for minutes, right? And then she'd start crying again. And we'd go over and over and over. And I'm going to tell you right now, sleep training or teaching a child to fall asleep on their own takes about 2 weeks straight. Commit in your mind to say every night, every nap, I'm going to do this for 2 weeks. And you got to be consistent, because if you're not consistent, it will not work. And if you're not consistent every time, oftentimes a baby will take 2 steps back before they go another step forward. And so that's why I say mentally prepare yourself, because it's almost harder on you sometimes than it will be on your child. But there is a light at the end of the tunnel for both of my children. After that 2 weeks, and even before for one of them, they were new children. Like I would lay them in the crib, they'd fall asleep on their own. I would walk out, they were wide awake, and they'd fall asleep on their own and wake up like 3 hours later for nap time and 12 hours later for nighttime. And they'd wake up with this huge smile on their face, and I knew they were rested. And that's another sign you look for when you see a baby that's able to self-soothe to sleep, is they wake up with this huge smile on their face because they finally got that really restful sleep that they're able to get if you teach them to self-soothe. And so whatever it takes, find the way that's going to help soothe them when you need to go back in there in between those increments. And I would slowly increase the increment that I would go in there. So it was 10 minutes the first time, it was 15 minutes, maybe the next 3 times. And then it was like 20 minutes the next, you've got 2 weeks to figure this out, but just be consistent. And it's going to be exhausting. It's going to be trying mentally and physically on you, but just know that there is a light at the end of the tunnel. There is. Don't give up. Because if you do, then you'll be back at square one or worse. So sorry to paint the realistic picture, but that is how it is. And after 2 weeks, my daughter, it was like a completely new child, right? And this was actually before she transitioned to the Zipadee-Zip when I sleep trained her. So when the Zipadee-Zip came, she had already been sleeping 12 hours. And when she stopped because she was breaking free from the swaddle, I knew it was time to come up with a solution, and that's when the Zipadee-Zip came. And then she went back to sleeping the 12 hours at night. But anyway, for my son was a little bit different. I did a much more gradual sleep training technique with very little crying, and I think a lot of it had to do with the fact that I lost a baby in between my daughter and my son, and I just wanted to be there. I wanted to make sure he was going to be safe, you know, after having gone through that experience. And so I would go in there, and I found that he really did well with me patting him on his behind and making that shushing sound, and that helped soothe him while he was in the crib. And I would go in there a lot more frequently, but I would pat and pat oftentimes until he would get right there on the edge of sleep, and sometimes even till he fell asleep, and then I'd walk out. And then sometimes I'd have to go back in a couple times, but he figured it out. And so it's going to be a lot of trial and error at first when you're doing self-soothing, when you're teaching self-soothing. But when you find that key, that little gem that teaches you, okay, this is how I can keep my little one in the crib where they can soothe, where I can help them learn how to soothe. And slowly but surely, you're going to notice you're going to have to pat a little less. You're going to have to shush a little less, until finally you just lay them down and walk out. And they wake up with this huge grin on their face. So there is hope for those of you who are like, this is not going to happen. And I will say it does help to do it when they're younger. Around the 3 to 4 month mark is a really great time to teach a child self-soothing techniques. And so try and do it sooner, because the later you do it, it may be a little bit more difficult because they've already established such strong habits. You know, I'll have a lot of women that'll say, I've been nursing my child to sleep for over a year now what? And it's a much more difficult process because the baby has come to absolutely rely on that. And so as you can imagine, if you can try and find a way to do that weaning process a little bit sooner, the better. And granted, the 3 to 4 month mark is a little bit tricky because that is when a baby learns how to roll. That's when they start going through a sleep regression. That's oftentimes when they start breaking free from the swaddle. So there's a lot going on there. So just know that there are some challenges that are going to happen there. And regardless of when you do it, there will be challenges because babies go through sleep regressions. They go through growth spurts that will affect their sleep. They, you know, so keep those things in mind. Don't get discouraged. Be consistent and persistent. Consistent, persistent always wins the race when it comes to teaching a little one how to self-soothe. I hope that helps. I know this is a crazy long video, and I'm so sorry, but I know there's a lot involved, and I hope this all helps a little bit. The question I had for you guys actually has something to do with oils, essential oils. I had started using tea tree oil on my son who had skin tags, and it really helps. But I was actually curious if, for those of you who use essential oils, I don't want to really know the brands or anything, but what oils have helped you and your family, your little ones specifically, and for what? So I want to know, just because I'm not as educated on that front, what you would recommend. So anyway, I hope all that helps you guys with the self-soothing. Good luck. I'm rooting for you. Prepare yourself mentally for the self-soothing and sleep training that will happen. And just know that when you're done,